Hello, everyone. Welcome to On the Ice. On today's episode, I am joined by the one, the only Murat Ates, who now has lived more years in Winnipeg than his hometown. And we will discuss how he has become the sports writer, the beat writer for theathletic.com and our own Winnipeg Jets. We'll talk a little bit about the Winnipeg Jets. We'll talk about life with hockey, without hockey, what he's been up to since everything's been shut down. And as we look forward to some of the dates and some of the times of potentially seeing NHL hockey returning, not in Winnipeg, but potentially the hub cities, one of three cities still being supposed to be chosen here in Canada. We'll talk about how that decision comes and all those other cool dates, because Marat is all in known. He is the smart one. He is the guru when it comes to these matters. Please welcome Murat Ates to On the Ice here on ASTV. And as mentioned and as promised, Murat Ates with The Athletic. Murat, I want to first off say it's great to finally meet you. I know you and I have had plenty of conversations and text messages over the months of the Winnipeg Jets season. Thank you for joining me. How have you been over the last 2 or 3 months, and what's been your major enjoyment so far without hockey?
Right on. Yeah, I mean, that can be a tough one to answer sometimes, but yeah, first and foremost, also good to have a face-to-face with you as well, Theo. Like you say, we've been talking hockey for a little while, but this is the first true meet, I guess. And then in terms of just what I've been able to get up to since things shut down, I mean, I'm still writing a ton at The Athletic, and doing my best to find stories that are still going to be relevant right now, even though there hasn't been hockey on the ice to play or fresh hockey to analyze. Away from that, though, best thing I did the entire pandemic was I started fostering another dog through the Winnipeg Humane Society. Her name was Holly. She was a great dog. I don't want to go too in depth, but I mean, when things get heavy in the world, a dog is just a great friend to have around. She kept me going for 3 walks a day, playing outside, getting outside in the sunshine. I mean, these are all just healthy, good, productive things, and so that was a great time. And she's been adopted now, so my work there is done. And we'll see about getting another one in here.
No doubt, no doubt. As you've mentioned, you're still writing fairly consistently. I have to ask you about your Mikkel Burden article real quick. A $200 cab ride.
A $200 cab ride, a life-changing $200 cab ride.
I don't want to tell too much of the story, but tell us the brief, 50-second story on this.
Sure. So Mikkel Burden, great goaltending prospect, the Winnipeg Jets, has been drafted at this point, but in September, a couple years back, he was attending camp in Russia for his old KHL team, and he was looking to find inroads in professional hockey, make a good salary, have a good life, get a lot of minutes, but he wasn't getting a lot of minutes, and he got a little bit desperate. He called his agent and said, look, you got to get me out of here. I got to play hockey. And so 5 minutes go by, he gets the call. Okay, you can come to North America. We got a career set up for you. Here's the deal. You got to be on a plane to Winnipeg tomorrow. And Mikkel Burden says, well, I'm not at home. I don't have my stuff. I'm on the road with the team. How is this going to happen? And then he hops in a cab, and life starts getting awfully good for him.
Quite a story. More stories like that at theathletic.com. Just find Murat Ates, and as you see on the bottom, you can follow him on Twitter. Don't crush him with so much work. He wants to take a bit of a break this week, so let's give him some space and some time. And I do want to thank him very much for joining me on this quote-unquote week off. Murat, how did you become the beat writer, the sports writer for the Winnipeg Jets? How was that? Lead us up to how this career to you today.
So there's a couple of threads that sort of need to be made sense of that bring me to The Athletic and bring me to be writing about the Winnipeg Jets for The Athletic. Number one is I don't know if you remember the quote unquote summer of analytics in 2014 when a bunch of people started getting hired by NHL teams. One of the people that sort of preceded that by a little bit online was known as Vic Ferrari, and his name is Tim Barnes. I used to blog at a site, an analytics site that he started. And he's the one that coined the term Corsi, started measuring shot attempts, all these sorts of things. And he was just doing it at a really advanced level in, 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, that kind of era. And eventually people sort of started to take notice of this guy. Like, hey, beyond just shot attempts and things like that, beyond Corsi, he's doing some really interesting logical work. Well, the Washington Capitals hired him to be a director of their analytics program. And then the second that they did that, the blog was shut down and I lost access to all of my old work. So it's like, I was just a young guy at the time. Let's not make it sound like it's that I was writing Pulitzer-worthy stuff there, but certainly trying to, predict how well is this player, kind of similar to what I've done with Patrick Lyonie. How many goals is he going to score this year? What are the factors that go into that? How do you project offense? And as soon as that stuff got taken down, two things happened. One, it had been a hobby for me. And I had to sort of rethink, where I was writing. I was writing in all sorts of other capacities at that time as well. The other thing is, I think it gave me a little bit of like street cred that I'm not sure that I had earned wholeheartedly, because by having this guy go, and he was the real deal, is the real deal. I'm still in touch with him today. But go from blogging to directing analytics for an NHL team. I mean, he won the Stanley Cup when Ovi won the Stanley Cup a couple years back, right? This is a big deal, and to have been associated with that, even though I was a very young guy, cutting my teeth, learning how to write data in an engaging way, how to write stories that have nothing to do with data as well. Being associated with that kind of got me on James Myrtle's radar. And then when the Athletic expanded to Winnipeg and we were talking about, I was able to get in touch with Myrtle and we were talking about different opportunities. He was actually familiar with the things that I had written almost 10 years ago, because he was such an early adopter of advanced stats and analytics. And he was at the same blog reading it like almost every day. And that was sort of the starting point from there. Was able to freelance, sort of cut my teeth, show that I developed the storytelling chops as well. And it's just been I'm so fortunate. It's just snowballed. It's been a wild ride since about September 2017 to now.
You certainly have a way, Murat, with words and, like you said, analytics, putting it in together in an engaging conversation piece, which is why I truly love reading a lot of them. Over your years of following hockey, I mean, even as a young lad, has analytics and these types of numbers been the true major difference to how you view hockey 20 years ago to today? I mean, if you look in, sure, players are getting bigger and, the net equipment's changing and it's lighter and all that jazz. You take all those factors out of it. But if you look at analytics in its essence, has that been the true game changer in how hockey is reviewed by hockey players and teams over the last 20 years from then to today?
Well, I would love to say yes, and I would love to make it that cut and dry, because certainly it's been a huge part of my life, and I feel like I've learned a lot more about hockey through studying analytics and simple things like growing up and assuming that the most famous defenseman on every team played the toughest minutes, and finding out that, well, you can actually, there's ways to measure it. How many minutes does Josh Morrissey play against the best players on other teams? How many minutes does Neil Pionk do it? And there's ways to sort of challenge what your assumptions about hockey might be. And just the idea of watching and studying it with my eyes, and I grew up playing it, and I played at high school and all that sort of stuff, and then having all of my assumptions challenged and measured, I think that was a big deal for me personally. But I think that in NHL circles, for example, people have always been trying to measure success and figure out who contributes how much to winning. And you got Roger Nielsen way back in the 70s and 80s talking about scoring chances and different types of metrics that he was using. And it's always been there, that passion amongst coaches and GMs to try to edge out another little bit of an advantage. And I think analytics, both in the public sphere and what some of the teams are able to do, and some of what's coming with player tracking in the next couple of years, that's one piece of the pie chart. It's one piece that they have access to them. But I also think just a lot of the pure forget the numbers, X's and O's, how do we drive the puck to important areas? How do we sequence the puck from our end to the other and then create a chance off of that? I think the way that teams attack each other and play offense these days and forecheck has evolved a lot, whether related to analytics or not. I think the X's and O's have really taken off in the last, or maybe it just feels like that to me, but in the last couple of decades as well. I think comparing the 90s game to today, or the pre-lockout game to today, it's still, I think we're still learning a lot about like the best way to play the game, whether it's numbers or coaches that don't use numbers that are sort of driving that.
It's an amazing evolution of a sport because you see, like you said, pre-lockout, you see neutral zone trap, you see different philosophies at it. Like you mentioned, Roger Nielsen back in the day, he probably could have called analytics, but he never used that word. He just had a bunch of pieces of paper with numbers jotted down in certain columns. And it's amazing how you go to an arena now and you hear people in the 300s or the 100s and they're still able to understand, you know, like you said, best chance scenarios, shots from the outside, in or outside the house, tough minutes played by defensemen. Speaking of that, let's talk about the Jets. How well do you think they're going to do, or how well do they fare with everyone else being on a break now? Is it kind of, how do you assess this return that potentially could happen? I mean, the Jets are going to be playing in the Flames, and in that first game. So tell me, Murat, how you think this is all going to pan out here in this next month in July.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, I mean, you did well to, like, I really appreciate the way you framed that because of the amount of time that's really going to have passed between Winnipeg's last game and its next game, right? So if you were ever going to try to project and assume that what season just happened is going to predict what happens in that best of five series, it's tougher than it probably has ever been, I think. And I genuinely do think that. In terms of Winnipeg, though, I think that one thing that I'd be looking for, Winnipeg of all teams, there was just a couple of weeks before things shut down where it seemed as though every single game they were able to ice a better team than what had come before. And part of that's the trade deadline, part of that's acquiring Dylan DeMello, partnering him with Josh Morrissey and saying, whoa, all of a sudden, you know, Josh Morrissey played admirably. It wasn't a dominant year for him, but he was partnered with Tucker Pullman for most of the season, who last year, he struggled through injuries. He's been in the AHL predominantly. To go from that to Dylan DeMello, that's a matchup savvy pairing. That's a strong pairing. Neil Pionk was doing a lot of work as well with Dmitry Kulikov. Now you can kind of squint and see a healthy top four that you might be able to match up against Calgary's forwards in a way that just wasn't the case in October, November, December throughout the rest of the year. So that's an interesting one. Then you have Matthew Perreault come back from injury. You have Adam Lowry come back from injury. And it seems they add Cody Eakin as well, who I see as a valuable depth piece, depth center. And now every team probably thinks that they're in a good spot. They're rested. They're getting healthier, all that sort of stuff. I think Winnipeg actually has that argument to make. It's likely to me that they stack up a little bit better than some of the numbers will suggest that they should based on the season that they just had. Does that mean that they're going to be able to roll through Calgary? I'm not sure. That's going to be a tight series. If you ask me to guess at it right now, tough to bet against Connor Hellebuck right now. Best goalie in the league this year.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to bet, Murat, because we still have literally 1 month to prepare for this return. And there's a lot of things that can happen, as we've seen, especially in the state of Florida, how Major League Baseball has had to shut down all of its spring training facilities. The Tampa Bay Lightning get hit pretty severely with some COVID-19 results. Has there been a discussion with the NHL once they get all these teams in these hub cities, which we'll talk about in a little bit? Are they going to be able to quarantine them within the city, or has there been any mention to that and any of those guidelines to which they're about to follow?
Yeah, so the NHL released, I think it was a 28-page sort of document a little while back about the different protocols that need to be in place. And that even applies to what's happening right now with what's called phase 2, these small, up to 6 players at a time, these small group workouts. And it speaks to the frequency that these guys need to be tested for COVID-19. It speaks to the cleaning procedures that need to happen between players, different groups of players using the ice or workout facilities and all of these things. So those rules are in place. And it's a good thing, because when you see those scary bits of news, like what happened at the end of last week with Florida, and then a training facility in Arizona as well, I believe,
Right.
The reason that the NHL is able to know these things is because they're testing as regularly and as regimentedly as they are. If they weren't doing these things, they wouldn't know. The interesting thing, and I think it's a question that's going to be on a lot of people's minds, because now there are positive COVID-19 tests in the NHL, is at what point does that threshold become too much? And at what point do things get shut down or dates delayed, or or does the system have to be reevaluated in some way? And I think that the fact that we haven't seen anything from the NHL as a panic move from last week suggests that there's a level that they're willing to deal with. There's an amount that they're willing to deal with, depending on what comes out of it. Gary Bettman and Bill Daly have said before that a single positive test doesn't shut the whole machine down. But the question is, well, how many does, right? And I don't know I don't think that that's a public number or a metric right now. When we get into camps, players will be getting tested. I believe it's at least once a day, and when play starts up again, I think it's daily as well. So the testing will be there. Is that enough? I'm not sure what to make of it at this point.
We talk about, Connor Hellebuyck having a tremendous year. Just like the other teams that'll be in this process of playoffs, 98% of them will be healthy with full rosters available. We talk about the Jets in March. They were probably one of the healthier teams going into a potential playoff run compared to last year where they were hobbling in. Knowing the fate, not having Big 33 on the blue line, securing a top 6 defensive group that we probably wouldn't have even thought of at the beginning of October, that this is what we're rolling in April with. And you start seeing forwards really commend each other and build chemistries. Does it hurt the fact that the Jets were one of those teams that people were worried about in March, and now everyone kind of hits the reset button thinking they're all going to be playing under the same circumstances in July?
I think that there would be something to that, mostly from the players' perspective. I think the various Jets, and there's been a handful that have either had video conference calls or I've been able to talk to a couple. And the ones that I've been in conversations with, I think they all feel like they finally put the difficulties and the angst of the season behind them. The Buffalo situation was resolved. The team was getting healthy. I think there's a real sense of momentum on their part, that they felt that, okay, let's just clear, like we finally hit a straightaway, let's go, kind of. Now, how does that project going forward? I'm not sure. One of the things, actually, in terms of trying to figure out what Winnipeg is going to look like for the playoffs, and this is something that I think, if you're a Jets fan, is probably exciting. I don't want to oversell how impactful it is, but when Paul Maurice and Charlie Huddy and everyone throughout the lineup looked at the defense available to the Jets at the beginning of the year, and they knew that Bufflin wasn't there, and they knew that there were injuries, and they knew that Tyler Myers and Ben Sherratt and Jacob Trouba weren't there. It was simply not the same defense as last year. They made tactical adjustments. They said, what can we good at? What can we be good at, pardon me, and what can't we be good at necessarily? So they took a little bit of edge off of the forecheck. They were a little bit more passive on the forecheck. Whereas last year, you could imagine, there's a great visual. You can picture Dustin Bufflin charging from the blue line up as soon as there's a loose puck. Winnipeg would almost play with 4 forwards and 1 defenseman for a little while because their D got so aggressive up ice. You didn't see that this year, and you didn't see that back check. You didn't see that committed forecheck from all 3 of Winnipeg's forwards either. There was definitely going to be one coming back up to play defense as hard as possible, because Winnipeg didn't want to give up any odd man rushes. So when you take that aggression from the blue line or off the blue line, and you take the aggression from the forward back, and now Winnipeg's lining up 3 of its guys on its own blue line to play defense as best as it can, you sacrifice offense. Like, it might be the smart, prudent thing to do, but you're losing scoring chances. You're losing opportunities to get the puck in, Mark Scheifele's hands, Patrick Laine's hands, Blake Wheeler's hands, all of these top scorers that Winnipeg has access to. So when I think about what Winnipeg's health means to it right now, and what the addition of Dylan DeMello means to the Winnipeg Jets right now, I think Paul Maurice is looking at that drawing board right now as we're building towards a return to play and saying, well, hey, we can actually tweak this a little bit back towards that other direction. We might be able to get a little bit more mileage out of our forwards and a little bit more offense because our defense has been patched together a little bit better. And that's something that I'd be quietly optimistic about if I were a Jets fan.
You mentioned Dylan DeMello's name twice now. You must think very highly of him, Murat, or at the same time, you've liked what he's done. I liked what he's done. I think he's been a great fit. He is a player that has played in San Jose and Ottawa and has looked for that chance to shine moment. And I think this has been his chance to shine moment with Josh Morrissey or whoever he's paired with. I also have to, I'm going to move away from the defense because I have to ask you, let's go back in the Peabody Wayback Machine to September. You have two of your top three scorers holding out on contracts. Are they better that they play on separate lines, or what have they been able to do over the course of this season that have made them both shine tremendously? I want to make a coin that says in Connor we trust on one side, and on the other side it says in Lyonie we score. I mean, but they're both playing unbelievable years in their short careers. What do you attest to their promise over the last 7 months and how well they've done considering what they started with in September?
Yeah, I think it really comes back to just the truth about both of these guys, and Kyle Connor and Patrick Lyonie, is that they're high-end offensive players. And I don't know that there's a single Winnipeg Jet with all the people that you have to choose from Mark Scheifele, let's include Patrick Lyonie in that. There's not one that I would trust more from about the hash marks in than Kyle Connor to bury a goal, to finish that play, to keep his wits about him and do the right thing to make sure that play gets finished. And that's something that he seems to be wired for, that speed and that agility, and he's got killer instincts from in tight. It's just special and it's just unique. And what the holdout, even at this time last year, I was sort of imagining that them and a lot of other RFAs would push well into September for some of those contracts. So I'm sure they were still training well. It's not the same as playing with the team. Whatever it is, it didn't seem to hold them back, at least overall offensively. Patrick Lyonie, the big question was always going to be, how is he going to round out his game? He's got the big shot. What else does he have available to him? And I think all season we saw a player he's figuring out when to use his frame and play almost a power forwards game from time to time. Because I think he grew up thinking that, the puck on his stick was going to make plays happen, especially in Finland, especially in in his youth hockey. Right. He was so dominant. Now he's sort of figuring out when to be a distributor, because his passing is exceptional, and I don't think he gets a lot of credit for that. When he should protect the puck on the wall. And he's still, both of these guys, Patrick Lyonie especially, are young guys. They're going to continue to get better. They're going to continue to flesh out their all-around game, because I think in both guys' cases, defense still needs to come a fair way. The metrics don't really support them as strong defensive players at this stage of their career, but they do things that other players can't. And Winnipeg's unique strength as a team is that they have a lot of these guys. They have them and Scheifele and Ehlers and Wheeler and Roslovic coming up, and that's a unique thing that Winnipeg has going for it. Not that best exemplified by those two players for sure.
Would you take Patrick Lyonie having more assists than goals this year? Would you have thought that at the beginning of the year? Or, I mean, you talk about well-rounding his game. I would rather have a Lyonie of today than one who's just focusing on chasing a scoring trophy.
You know what? I considered myself probably going back a year and a half as a bit of a Patrick Lyonie truther. I've been on the Lyonie can pass bandwagon and trying to get it going. Would I have bet that he was going to have that degree of a breakout season as a distributor? I'm not sure that I would have, but I believe that he has the chops for it. And looking at Winnipeg's power play, for example, where Blake Wheeler is just such an excellent distributor. He makes the right pass. He sets people up time and time again. Well, if the play ever ends up broken and ends up on Patrick Lyonie's stick, he's often making the exact same pass through two sticks and through the same seam back to Blake Wheeler just to restart the whole thing, or choosing when to rim it around the boards, or finding Mark Scheifele or whatever the other options he has available to him. And I think that there's a realization in his game that he has access to that, and he can do it all ways now that we used to only see glimpses about. 100% with you, Theo. I think Patrick Lyonie of today, great player and ever improving.
I like both of them. I mean, 81, 29, I mean, 27, you mentioned them all. I mean, all we really need to see is, Jack Roslovic, who I still think very highly of. He's the next player in check. Him, and I'm a big fan of Tucker Pullman if he can stay healthy. We need both of those guys to start leading their way into some shining light material, which I think they will. Marat, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about the dates in July and how this return to play is going to be going on for all of us that are unaware, and see what happens here. We'll be right back here on the ice. Murat Ates joins me today on the ice. We're talking Jets. We're talking return to play. We're talking about those little questions we may not know about. And of course, comparing our Jets from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Marat, I want to thank you very much for joining me. Let's look ahead to the present, not so distant future here. Let's look at the dates in July in regards to getting the teams together, that first preseason game, and then ultimately that first best-of-5 series. How many Jets still have to – are the Jets coming to Winnipeg first? Because we still don't know which hub city they'll be going to, right?
Yeah, that's right, and it's also a good question. I think that it's still possible that Winnipeg attempts to run its camp outside of Canada if need be. There's the real issue is players returning to Canada from outside will be asked to self-quarantine, and there's constantly every day there's new news or updates about that. If Winnipeg is worried that that its players will be made to self-isolate, and then it's either on them to get their players back home immediately or to accept that maybe they'd be looking at running camp in another location. I'm not sure that decision has been made yet. I know that the Jets facilities in Winnipeg haven't been open, whereas, with Florida, with other different situations, teams are allowed to open their facilities. And Winnipeg hasn't done that yet, predominantly because so many of the Jets' summer homes or other locations are simply outside of the city, and there hasn't been that groundswell for that. In terms of hub cities and the like, it seems as though Canada is becoming progressively more and more likely, whether it's Vancouver, Edmonton, or Toronto. So maybe that changes things a little bit. All I can say, the last I was aware of, Winnipeg still considering kind of all of the options on that front.
So no decisions really been made because of the players and where they are currently. Is it safe to say that these players are finding some sort of ice to stay in somewhat decent shape?
Yeah, I would say the majority probably do have access to ice in some respect. I can't say that with certainty, but that's kind of how I understand it. And all will have detailed workout programs from Winnipeg's fitness coaches and strength coaches and all of that sort of stuff, which is, I think, for some of them, depending on what facilities they have available to them, a little bit of a fun challenge. I was joking with Todd Woodcroft at one point that that they're gonna it'll be all core strength and no great weight pushing or anything like that, and they're basically going to be more like gymnasts when they come back than hockey players based on what they have available to them. But I think that at this point, this isn't 2 weeks into this pandemic business anymore. We're months in, and I think they've got these things sort of sorted out.
So what date? So July. The first game for the Jets, I was told, is around the 23rd, 24th. Is that correct around that time?
I'm not sure. So you referenced, I guess it was a New York.
Yeah, the New York Post last week or last night mentioned some dates where July 30th was potentially going to be the first day of playoff hockey, and they were going to have a preseason, like they're just having a one-game, type of preseason game to kind of ramp things up, so to speak, within a hub city that they haven't made official yet, of course. But there was going to be a preseason 2-week camp leading up to it as well. So when you really think about it, by July 8th, 9th, you got most of your team assembled, knowing which city they're going to be in roughly. Doesn't have to be potentially a hub city, but at least the team is together. They go through that quarantine 14-day process, then they play that one game probably within a hub city. And that's all I really know because I haven't heard much more details outside of that. And the NHL hasn't made mention of saying exactly this is the case. So I'm going by hearsay as well. But you think about July, this is like preseason. This is like September for these players. And they're looking forward to getting back on the ice just as much as we are looking forward to not only writing about live sports, but also watching it from the comfort of our home because we're probably not going to see fans in the stands.
That's right. That much is a near certainty. Yeah. And yeah, everything that you sort of just walked through in terms of dates is consistent with my understanding. I mean, July 10th is the date that I know to be opening of camps, and then the process between there and the play-ins being between 2 to 3 weeks, 2 weeks of camp, and then another week of exhibition or what have you. So that's soon, right? That is getting sooner all the time. I'm looking at the calendar at the bottom of my corner. June is almost over, and so we're getting into that time period where it's go time. We were talking about 2 weeks of isolation if they need it. Well, 2 weeks before July 10th, I believe, falls on June 26th or 27th, or something. To double check me on that, please. I don't want to mislead you, but we're getting to that. We're getting to that point, and so camp starting in July 10th, and then working towards those play-in games and exhibition games before the play-in games to get these guys up to speed. It's going to be wild to think of who can be a hot starter, who can be, can Connor Hellebuck be as dominant on July 23rd or 30th or whatever it ends up being as he was throughout so much of the season? And then does any of this stuff change? I don't think the NHL wants it to change. I think the appetite is to stick to the dates that you're talking about, or stick to the timeline that we're sort of have been made aware of it. But as we talked about a little bit earlier as well, I mean, there have been some positive COVID-19 cases. So where does that come into it? Does it change who the hub cities are going to be from what the NHL originally anticipated or wanted to? July's coming in an awful hurry, and I think it's a good time to start talking about this.
Absolutely. I mean, it's good time as any. I mean, like, you think about it, last week we would be talking about NHL awards. We'd be seeing a team throw up Lord Stanley above their heads, potentially last week. Does the time frame, does the chronological cycle change for some of these players, thinking, okay, we've been off the ice 4 months now? I mean, I remember talking to you March 11th. I think it was March 11th you and I last chatted, via text, of course, or through a radio wave somewhere. And we're now like 4 months, like, this is the longest break for a lot of these players not being near ice or playing in a competitive sense. There are going to be, some interesting times, let's put it, in July for not just the Jets, but everybody. I got to ask you, if we to stick with Canadian hub cities here, Marat, I find that Toronto and Edmonton have a bit of a jump start on Vancouver, considering how far Vancouver is away from everything else. I mean, we talk about, the reason why, we talked about other sports, the Seattle Supersonics aren't in Seattle anymore, why the Vancouver Grizzlies for the NBA didn't happen, isn't there anymore. The potential of the NHL returning to Seattle, so far on the Pacific coastline. Does that play as a positive or a negative factor for Vancouver being a potential hub city?
I think that the time zone would have been a negative for Vancouver to a certain degree. And the reason I say to a certain degree is that if the NHL could draw this up however it wanted, it would have a team in the West and a team in the East. You'd have an Eastern time zone, a hub city, and you probably have a Mountain time zone hub city as well. And I think for a lot of reasons, the NHL loves the idea of Vegas, whether it's facilities, amenities, hotels, the fact that they can sort of promise their team, this isn't Florida like NBA gets it, but there might be, events and shows or something that they can safely attend and not be bored out of their tree, while, compared to what some of the other options might be. But I think with the COVID-19 realities being that, some of these cities, and the NHL just cut down from 10 to 6, some of the cities that are still being considered have a reasonable amount of COVID-19 in the environment as well, and which makes Canada seem all the more appealing and all the more interesting as well. So I think that whatever disadvantage Vancouver would have had on that front, I actually hold Vancouver and Edmonton, probably Edmonton #1 in Canada, but I hold those two as perhaps the most likely, as much as the NHL would love. Like Toronto, Vegas, I think would be what the NHL would enjoy the most, but they're biding their time and seeing what the realities end up being and what they're able to do. All to say, I think that's a great point about Vancouver, but I still think that they're very much in the mix.
Do you think it would have helped if you would have seen teams like the Coyotes, the Sharks, the Ducks, and the Kings all in this potential playoff area? Because those 4 teams I just listed off aren't in there. It's Vegas and Vancouver basically on the West Coast and everything on the East Coast. I mean, we look at all the bunches of cities on the East Coast from Pennsylvania to New York. There's a plethora of teams that are there in that area, and Toronto's not too far away. So I agree with you. Toronto, the NHL would love to see it in Toronto. Vegas, of course. Certainly don't have to go to Florida because you've already got the NBA and Major League Baseball doing their thing down there already. We don't need a third professional sports group down there. Murat, of the cities that are in the United States besides Vegas, what else do you like about? You mentioned the fact that all 3 cities still have a contingency of COVID, how do you maintain the safety of the players in these teams? And I guess that's through that protocol that they've administered through phase 2 already too, correct?
Yeah, and the protocol sort of ramps up in intensity as they move from phase 2, these small group workouts, to camp, and then to actual playoffs as well. I mean, I believe that during phase 2 right now, that it's 2 tests per week, or roughly that amount. Whereas by the time that these guys are playing, it'll be daily tests. So that's part of it. The degree to which they're kept in a bubble, essentially, or not, I think there's still a few questions to answer there, and it'll depend on what COVID-19 is like in the environment there. It's interesting that you should mention, those Californian teams as well. And I don't know if they've already been told they're out or if they're going to be soon, but Los Angeles was technically one of the final 10 hub city possibilities as well, even though they don't have a team in the mix. And I know Columbus is out. Columbus was doing well, I think, as far as American cities do with COVID-19 as well, but they're out. It really continues to look like, Vegas, Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, something in that group. How are they going to stay safe? I mean, it's so tough, right? If you think about the amount of people that they're gathering together, how difficult it is, as important as it. Everybody knows, self-isolate, wear a mask, don't go out if you feel sick, all those other sorts of things. We see that all the time. But let's say an NHL player goes the full 2 months of playoffs. Are they really going to be expected to do that without ever leaving the hotel or what have you as well? And I think that push and pull between what freedoms they're given just to be decent to them as human beings, being made to play this out, and safety for everybody as well. I get the sense, or at least it's my understanding, that some of that's still being worked out on. And I don't know how it's going to land. Because let me tell you, if I were sent to cover such a thing, I'm cautious enough personally that I don't think I would be in the restaurants and the bars and all those other sorts of things. But does an NHL player going through 2 months of a playoff grind, can they reasonably be expected to do the same? Will a bubble be mandated, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know how that all answers or how that all sorts itself out.
Yeah, no, it's going to be tremendously interesting times to see how this 2019, 2020 season really finishes up. I do hope they end up getting a Stanley Cup final and figure that out, because I know these players have been waiting days and days to finally enjoy lifting and having that opportunity to play. Some dates have come and gone. I mean, like the original date of NHL awards and the original date of a Stanley Cup winner. We haven't touched on free agency dates and how things like this are being contingently looked over, or have they been looked over, or have they been addressed by the NHL? I mean, I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, Rod, I don't know, July 1 rolls around, there's free agents that are potentially still playing on teams, but they're potentially still under contract as well. I mean, how does that really work?
So there is some mechanism, and I don't know the ins and outs of it, by which the NHLPA and NHL can simply just agree that that free agency doesn't begin until the season is over. Okay. And in terms of when that date actually begins, it's going to depend. I don't think that that's an official date set yet, but it will likely be, October, November is kind of what I'm imagining for that as well right now, all pending about letting everything else happen before it, having a Stanley Cup winner, having a draft, all those sorts of things. And I'm sure that the NHL and the NHLPA, their focus groups that they have, and they talk, I believe it's daily from Monday to Friday. I'm sure that they have scenarios in mind for what that date is actually going to be for free agency, but that's not public and that's not announced necessarily yet. The interesting thing is too, and I don't know that you're necessarily going to see this happen, is that teams that are out of the playoff picture entirely, they can make trades, they can make transactions, all of this sort of stuff is out there. Just like at any time, in any season, teams can make trades and just not use those players, so you don't tend to see it as well. You've started to see a couple of those tweener players, those depth players at the NHL level or AHL, sign in Europe, kind of making it known that, hey, we don't know how North America is going to sort itself out, and we can make more money as journeymen in the KHL than we can in the AHL and things like that. So That's all, I guess, an aside. Theo, what you're really asking about is free agency and how that's all going to get affected. And I think that everybody's just putting it on the back burner until everything else gets sorted out.
People just want to see a season start. They want to see a season end. Once that season ends, my last question to you, Marat, is how is the 2020-2021 season going to look in your eyes, considering that we have taken this 4.5-month break to finalize a current season?
Yeah, I think that the NHL wants it to be a full 82 games and is willing to delay and push it back and play with the calendar as necessary. And I've heard things as late as a January 1 start for next season, and still with the appetite of playing a full 82 games, which is, you can just imagine how compressed that will be and how we'll be back here in the hot summer months next year still being able to talk about ongoing NHL hockey. I think it'll take a couple of rounds through the calendar to get things back in order. Now, what's it going to take to have fans back? I think that's why January seems to make sense. I've heard WHO reports that we might be looking at a vaccine by then. I'm not sure how that all plays into the NHL's plans, but the whole thing is better if there's fans in the stadium and they can enjoy being there. And I think that's what the NHL prioritizes the most for next year, for joy and for making their revenue.
Absolutely. You talk about revenue. It's a big deal for the NHL because you talk about contracts they have with the major sports people out there, the NBCs, the Foxes, and all that. We don't have that much like the other three do. And especially if you talk about the NFL and how much of a juggernaut they are with their television rights and whatnot. It's pretty impressive that, if they get on, they could probably survive without fans in the stands, knowing that they'll have just as many people watching the game on TV. Murat Ates of The Athletic. Follow him on Twitter at WPG Marat. Thank you so much for enlightening me a little bit. And I enjoy, again, listening to you talk and put together Ferrari Corsi numbers and all that jazz into a well-compelled argument and a wonderful piece of read. I really enjoy it, Marat. Thank you so much. Have a great week off. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time. And we look forward to seeing you and what you're about to write once this season starts up again. Thank you again. Any last words you'd like to say? Shouts out to any people, some highs, some buys.
Just let me just say thanks. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was great talking with you.
Murat Ates of The Athletic. Follow him. Find him at theathletic.com. Murat, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been On the Ice here on Amateur Sports TV.